Some children are not praised for being happy. They are praised for being easy. Easy to leave alone. Easy to rely on. Easy to talk to when the adults are falling apart. Easy to admire because they never seem to need much. And for a while, that praise feels like love. But there is a private tragedy hidden inside it. Because when a child becomes the strong one too early, what usually gets mistaken for maturity is not maturity at all. It is adaptation. It is a nervous system learning, far too soon, that safety is not something you receive. It is something you perform, and that is one of the quietest ways that childhood disappears. Not through one dramatic ending, not through one obvious catastrophe, but through repetition, through being the one who notices, the one who calms down first, the one who does not make things harder, the one who learns without anyone saying it directly that their feelings can wait. Carl Jung once wrote that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. And sometimes that burden does not arrive as violence. Sometimes it arrives as atmosphere, as instability, as emotional unpredictability, as the silent assignment to become responsible for more than a child should ever have to hold. So the child adjusts. They become useful. They become perceptive. They become prematurely composed. But usefulness is not the same as safety, and composure is not the same as peace. That distinction matters, because many people who grew up too fast do not walk through life thinking, I was wounded. They walk through life thinking, I'm just independent. I'm just better on my own. I'm just not very needy. I just don't trust people that easily. And all of that may feel true. But beneath it, there is often an older sentence still running the system. If I need too much, I make life harder for everyone. If I fall apart, no one will catch me. If I want comfort, someone else will have to pay for it. So they stop asking. Not because they do not have needs, but because they learned that having needs was dangerous, inconvenient, or expensive. This is what psychology calls parentification in one of its many forms. Not always a child raising siblings. Not always a child doing adult tasks on paper. Sometimes it is subtler than that. Sometimes it is a child becoming the emotional adult in a house full of grown bodies. The one who senses tension before anyone speaks. The one who knows when to stay quiet. The one who understands moods better than language. The one who becomes emotionally literate before they ever get to be emotionally held. And that kind of child often becomes an adult. Others admire, reliable, capable, wise for their age, calm in crisis, but admiration can hide the cost. Because what developed early was not simply strength. It was vigilance. It was self-suppression. It was the ability to function while abandoning oneself in real time. They did not become strong because life initiated them into wisdom. They became strong because softness felt unsafe. And when that happens, development does not unfold evenly. One part of the person grows old too soon. Another part gets stranded. So you meet adults who are incredibly competent, yet secretly exhausted by being perceived as capable. Adults who give extraordinary care, yet feel ashamed when they want the same in return. Adults who can read a room in seconds, but cannot always identify what they themselves are feeling until hours later. This is the split many people never understand about themselves. They are mature in performance. But under that performance, there are needs that were never allowed to mature naturally. Needs for comfort, needs for reassurance, needs for rest without guilt, needs to be protected without having to earn it first. That is why growing up too fast often creates a very specific inner conflict. You long to be held, but you do not know how to relax once someone gets close. You want support, but the moment it arrives, something in you tenses. You want to stop carrying everything alone. But being cared for can feel strangely humiliating, or suspicious, or undeserved, because the body remembers what the mind has already intellectualized away. It remembers that dependence once came with risk. That peace could be interrupted. That calm was often temporary. That love in some environments was most available when you were useful, so even rest becomes complicated. This is one of the least understood consequences of chronic early responsibility. People assume rest feels good to everyone. It does not. For some people, rest feels like exposure. When they are not doing, fixing, helping, anticipating, or holding things together, they do not feel peaceful. They feel unnecessary, or unprotected, or vaguely afraid. As if something is about to go wrong, simply because nothing is currently wrong. Research on chronic childhood stress points to this kind of nervous system conditioning. The body learns to remain prepared, and later silence does not feel like relief. It feels like the moment before impact. So they stay active. They stay useful. They stay mentally ahead of the room, not always because they want to achieve, but because alertness became their version of belonging. This also explains why so many people who grew up too fast feel guilty when they receive care. Not uncomfortable, guilty, as if being comforted creates debt, as if being helped means taking from someone else, as if their pain needs to be edited down before it becomes acceptable to bring into the room. So they say, I'm fine. They say, it's okay, don't worry about me. They say, I can handle it. And often they can. That is part of the tragedy. They can handle it. They have handled it. They have handled too much for too long. But capability can become a prison when everyone mistakes it for evidence that you do not need gentleness. Abraham Maslow wrote that in any given moment we have two options: to step forward into growth or back into safety. But for the child who grew up too fast, growth and safety were never cleanly separated. What looked like growth was often survival. What looked like maturity was often adaptation. What looked like independence was often grief that had learned how to stay organized. And if that describes you, there is something important to say carefully. You were not difficult for needing more. You were not weak for wanting softness. You were not too much for hoping someone would notice the weight before you collapsed under it. You were a child. A child who learned how to become functional before feeling protected. A child who discovered that being needed felt more secure than being known. A child who built an identity around steadiness because steadiness was the closest thing available to love. But an identity formed in survival will eventually start to ache. Because there comes a point when the self that protected you begins to outlive its purpose. And what once kept you safe begins to keep you lonely. That is where healing quietly begins. Not in becoming less responsible overnight. Not in blaming your entire life on the past. Not in turning fragility into an aesthetic. But in recognizing that the part of you that always goes first, always helps first, always steadies first, is not your whole self. It is a strategy, a brilliant one, a painful one, a strategy that deserves gratitude, but not permanent control. Viktor Frankl wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is our freedom. For someone who grew up too fast, that space is often where healing returns. The pause before automatically saying, I'm okay. The pause before apologizing for needing comfort. The pause before turning every ache into competence. And inside that pause, a new truth can begin. Maybe I do not have to earn care through usefulness. Maybe rest is not negligence. Maybe softness is not collapse. Maybe being loved as a person is different from being valued as a function. That is a difficult truth to learn if your childhood trained you in the opposite. But it may also be the most important one. Because healing in this case is not becoming helpless. It is not becoming smaller. It is not losing your strength. It is finally learning that your strength does not have to be the only thing about you that gets to live. And maybe that is the deepest wound in growing up too fast. Not just that you carried too much, but that you became someone the world could depend on before you ever got the chance to discover who you were without the weight. So if you have always been the calm one, the capable one, the one who never asks for much, ask yourself something gentler than, what's wrong with me? Ask this instead, who did I have to become in order to survive? And who might still be waiting underneath that strength? For permission to finally stop carrying everything alone?